Hello and welcome to the final lecture of COM 285 Photojournalism. Today we will be discussing the photo story, or some people call it the photo narrative, telling stories with pictures. So, for many photojournalists, telling whole stories with pictures is the ultimate professional experience, um, regardless of whether the stories appear in print or the internet or television. It's what they do. It's the lifeblood of who they are in terms of their profession. So they love to tell stories through photography. In fact, they couldn't see it any other way or doing it any other way. So that begs the question, how does a picture story differ from just a collection of pictures? So typically a picture story, or again a picture or photo narrative, has a theme, an overarching center theme. Not only are the individual pictures in the story about one subject or one theme, but they also help to support one central theme. For instance, sometimes a picture story, again a picture narrative or photo narrative, comes from the photographer's own experience. When photojournalist Brian Plonka's alcoholic father celebrated 10 years of sobriety, Plonka decided to explore alcoholism with his camera. As you know, is typical for photojournalists. Something happens in their life, a light bulb goes off, and they think, "Ooh, this might be an interesting topic for a photo series or photo narrative." Each photo in this series, um, entitled "Alcohol Bringing Us Together," has a cut line, and we discussed those before. Um, and all photos within a photo narrative or photo series should have um, cut lines. Even individual photos by themselves, that's not within a series, like the ones we discussed before, feature images, portraits, so on and so forth, have to have cut lines. And we'll review cut lines further along in the lecture here. But for this particular series, let's read some of the cut lines for each one of these photos. So for photo one, starting at the far left hand side of the screen here, photo one. For some, the introduction to alcohol comes early. James Danto Ramirez, 3 year 3-year-old, rebuffs his father's attempt to share a beer. "It doesn't smell good," says James. Photo 2, right below it. For many, like these businessmen at the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society in Chicago, tasting alcohol loosens the tongue and tightens the bonds of friendship. Some 26,000 members strong, the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society is the world's largest drinking club. Center of the screen, photo 3. The combination of Pearl Jam, booze, and teenagers equal one big party. "It's what everybody does, and it brings us together," says one concert fan. Research shows that first use of alcohol usually begins around the age of 13. Drunken driving is the leading cause of death among young Americans. To the right of it, photo 4. A student or students wind down with beer and liquor after a week of classes. Some say they like the carefree mood alcohol instills. Others say that they like the way it allows them to let down their guard. Photo 5 directly underneath it. "Come on, man, do it," says a buddy, prompting his friend to guzzle from a beer bong at a North Illinois University party. The friend sucks beer from a tube attached to a funnel. Total consumption time for 12 ounces, less than 10 seconds. So I took the time to read all of these cut lines, so to one, show you the format and how you would typically write a cut line, but also to show that these cut lines aren't just short descriptions. Um, they're generally detailed in terms of those five W's that we talked about: the who, what, when, where, and how. So when you're writing these cut lines, make sure that you're giving or addressing those five W's. And we'll go into more detail and review what we've talked about before in the previous class later in the slideshow. Alternatively, alcohol can also tear people apart and have negative effects, and this is probably obvious. I'm going to read through these cut lines for each one of these photos. To reach, and this is for photo one, far left, to reach potential customers, alcohol companies spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year promoting their products. Uh, One could imagine that a lot of good could be done with that particular money, but um, that's another story in another class discussion. Photo 2, center of the slide. Friends and family pay their last respects to Peter Salzuk, his wife, Shama, and their daughters Elizabeth and Catherine. An 18-year-old allegedly drunk, uh, an 18-year-old alleged drunk driver killed the entire family as they drove to their summer home. Photo, photo 3, directly right of it. A dispute over the rationing of a six-pack resulted in a companion shoving this man's head through a liquor store window. Photo 4, directly below it. 3 cases of beer take a toll on men at a poker party at a cheap motel. After several hours of drinking, playing cards becomes impossible. So again, uh, in a photo story, there needs to be a central theme, whether it's in the previous examples that we've seen, alcohol bringing people together or tearing them apart, or whatever the topic is. All these photos need to, again, tie to the central theme or central topic in general, or it can tell a linear narrative from beginning, middle to end. Talking with other people can also provide uh, picture story ideas. Photojournalist Ken Cobre had a conversation in passing with a professor of special education at San Francisco State University about the effects of crack cocaine on children exposed to the drug while in the womb. The professor pointed out that a behavioral epidemic was brewing in public education as crack exposed children started to enter the schools. More questions and additional research led to a photo story about the potential impact of quote unquote crack kids in the classroom. So, again, topics can be found in many, many different ways, but let's be more specific here on how topics can be found. Um, this leads up to our next slide: finding stories that matter, right? Because there's a myriad of different topics that you can choose to cover as a photojournalist, and we need to discuss the ways that you can get to those points. So to find stories that matter, think about the problems you and your friends face, right? There's issues all around you. Um, One obvious issue in this day and age is the COVID-19 crisis that we're going through. There's tons of stories that can branch off from that particular subject. To give you an example, in San Francisco, cyclists confront the huge problem of bicycle theft. Leave your bike on the sidewalk for a few minutes, even if it's attached to a parking meter and locked up, and there have still been cases where bikes have been stolen, and this is probably common in a lot of places. Nationally, bike theft is a multi-million-dollar problem affecting thousands of two-wheeled commuters. Each year, somewhere between 800,000 and 2 million bicycles worth some $50 million are stolen. And though 48% of stolen bikes are recovered by law enforcement, only 5% of stolen bikes are returned to their owners. All that to say, so Is there a possible photo story here? Sure, of course there is. Especially given the statistics that we just talked about, this affects millions of people potentially. So, of course, there's an interest there, a story interest there, which can be focused through a photo series or photo narrative. Let's look at some other ideas or ways that we can um, pull ideas for a photo story. And again, these are just examples, and there's tons that you can come up with. But these are just a few examples. You can do a story about the ways bicycle owners go about trying to protect their bikes with multiple locks. Um, what kind of locks are they using? What are some of the methods that they're using? Are there some that are super secure, or some that are kind of done in vain? Um, so on and so forth. So you can again shoot a series of photos showcasing this and how bike owners choose to protect their bikes. You can follow the police in their efforts to recover stolen bikes. If you have an in or a connection to a police officer or someone that monitors this type of thing, this could be a gold mine in terms of covering um, how people pursue or how specifically police officers or those in law enforcement pursue these types of cases. You could find a former bicycle thief and have him or her show you the tricks for ripping off locked bicycles in less than 2 minutes. Um, and I add to that good luck. Of course, it'd be probably far-fetched to find someone that would actually bring you through this process and maybe even possibly incriminate themselves. But you never know. And if you do find someone that would be willing to share this information with you, or at least open this slice of the world to you, then it could make for a very interesting photo narrative. You can photograph the steps a person goes through to recover a bike. A lot of people don't know the first step of even trying to recover their own bike or their stolen property. So again, this could be a way that you can showcase a story within a photo series. You might do a story about a person who carries his bicycle everywhere, even to the bathroom, so it would never be stolen. Again, that's a very specific um, topic there, but who knows? You may find someone that is within that niche and that possessive and maybe even I would say obsessive about their bike. You just never know what kind of stories will come out. But the thing is, you have to brainstorm. You have to kind of hash out the possibilities so that you can come up with interesting photo stories. A formula for visual variety. To ensure visual variety in your photos, or more specifically, a tendency to shoot the same subject in the same exact way, which can be kind of boring, you want to follow this formula, quote unquote. You can shoot overall, more specifically, a wide angle or aerial shot to establish the scene. The following, should I say, the first three steps of the formula could also be seen as shooting wide, medium, and tight. But in this first step, again, you want to shoot at a wide angle, which again establishes where we are, whether that's a classroom like we see in the photo here, or wherever. You shoot wide to show the audience where we are. In fact, this is similar to shooting an environmental portrait. Again, where if you remember, we take our main subject and place them in a setting that kind of tells a story of who they are. You can shoot medium, which focuses on one activity or a group, so it's a slightly tighter shot, um, which might, again, showcase one particular individual, and maybe we're focusing on what they're wearing, or um, maybe they're involved in a specific activity. We're just shooting a little tighter so that we can showcase that. And then the close-up, an even tighter shot, of one element, like a person's hands. They might be sewing a dress or solving a problem, again, like the photo that we see here. And we can have a tighter shot of them actually scrawling out the equation, or just showcase an intricate detail of a building or whatever, what have you, but a tight shot. So again, right off the top here, we have three different types of visual variety where we're shooting wide, medium, and tight. The eye, or should I say the viewer of photos, wants to see some kind of visual variety. You can even add that to cinematography in the movies. If you had to watch someone, even if it was an exciting scenario where someone was, I don't know, stealing a car, you never see, uh, let's just say in a crime movie, you never see the thief um, on a wide angle stealing the whole car, right? They'll have a wide shot of him looking at the car, then a medium shot of him walking to the car, and then a tight shot of him pulling out a Slim Jim or whatever you call those things and trying to pop the lock. There's visual variety. The camera is moving and showing variety from different angles. So it's very important. Let's move on to a few other shots. You can shoot a portrait, either a dramatic, tight headshot of a person in his or her environmental setting. You can shoot people interacting, whether they're conversing or they're doing an activity together, so on and so forth. You can shoot in a sequence, a how-to before and after, or a series with a beginning, middle, and end. The sequence gives the essay of a sense, or should I say, the sequence gives the essay a sense of action, moving from one point to the other. In my video production class, I talk about that all the time. Making sure that your narrative, your story has a clear beginning, middle, and end. The same thing applies here with the photo narrative. Um, as I said before, you can't have photos shot under a central theme that doesn't have a clear beginning, middle, and end. But one good way to ensure that you have a good photo narrative is to keep that in mind. If it applies to the topic that you're trying to cover, is there a way that I can showcase this story with a clear beginning, middle, and end? And then a clincher, a closer that would end the story. So a tight shot of someone closing their eyes for a nap, or another wide shot, which wide shots can be establishers or establishing shots showing us where we are, but it also can close a shot too, where or close a narrative where we see a wide shot of someone walking into the horizon during a sunset or whatever. But find some way to, especially if you're going with a photo story that has a clear beginning, middle, and end, to have a clincher photo, something that clearly ends the narrative. Now, I think it's important that we review cut lines and captions. In a previous assignment, I think that um, it wasn't very clear, perhaps, what it takes to write a cut line or a caption. Uh, so let's go ahead and review what those are and why they're important. So cut lines are simple present tense sentences. They identify the who in the picture, their title, if applicable, and provide context of what the subject is doing in the photo. So again, we're trying to satisfy those five W's to a certain extent. In this particular photo, we can see here a Black Lives Matter protester, and some of you guys may have seen this photo before. The cut line for the photo reads, Aisha Evans being detained by law enforcement officers at a Black Lives Matter protest in 2016 outside the headquarters of the Baton Rouge Police Department. So you see again that although we have a somewhat of a short sentence here, um, there's still a lot of detail in it that tells us about a lot about what's going on in the photo. We have the who, Aisha Evans. Also, the who could be included, or should I say, the law enforcement officers could be included in the who, quote unquote. Where, at a Black Lives Matter protest in Baton Rouge. Again, the where is addressed. Um, and more specifically, they're out. They are protesting outside the headquarters uh, of the Baton Rouge Police Department. So again, we're giving context, we're giving specifics about what's going on in the photo. It's not just a short and sweet, this is Aisha Evans and police officers, and that's it. No, we're giving details about what's going on in the photo. Now, the photo, as people say, can be worth, a million words. However, context is important, making sure that we know, or the viewers know, specifically what's going on in the photo, because the photo could be misinterpreted otherwise. Captions and cut line and captions are somewhat uh, similar in what we're trying to cover here, but captions can be a little bit longer. Captions typically are longer in length, and they contain a variety of information. They also can include the who, doing what, when, where, why, how, and a quote. So again, these are a little bit more, or captions, should I say, are a bit more detailed than the cut line. You're giving it a little bit more leeway to have even more information. So when writing captions and cut lines, investigate every picture as it's being taken. So when you're taking those photos, you kind of have to think about even beforehand what's going on, what you're shooting, why you're shooting it, so on and so forth. But also when you're shooting it, or while you're shooting it rather, think about what's going on as well. Keep in mind what's going on and take note. And this can help inform you whenever you're writing those cut lines after you're done shooting. Photographers should be reporters too, and they should be expected to and prepared to gather information, right? Not just visual information, but information in general, textual information, so that we can again write proper cut lines or caption to give more context to our photos. Photojournalists should also set aside time to talk to the subjects in the photograph if possible, especially if it's someone that you don't know very well, and you're just covering them for the first time. Talk to them, get more context of what's going on in the situation. When writing, provide the when, where, why, or how of the photo of the event, and we've talked about that already. Let's look at this particular cut line for this photo. Laith Mahash, an Iraqi refugee from Baghdad, breaks out in tears of joy, holding his son Tai and his daughter Noor after they arrive safely at a beach of the Greek island of Chios on 15th of August 2015. My apologies for butchering a lot of that cut line there. But you see, again, that the specifics are there in terms of the who, what, when, where, and how. We have every one of our subjects named, which goes back to talking to your subjects. Let's just say that you're a photographer, you knew a photojournalist on the scene here. You knew absolutely no one that you're photographing. You have to uh, get those names, get those titles, so that you can put them in the cut line here. You have to know where you are specifically. You have to know the date, so that again, your viewers can have accurate information. Now we've talked quite a bit about photo stories, how to gather information for them and think about your theme. We talked about cut lines once again. So let's look at some examples of photo stories put together. Um, Now, for the following examples, not all of the photos in the photo series are showcased here, but enough are shown so that you can get kind of the general idea of how to put these stories together and what they look like. Glimpsing the Goths, Lifestyles of the Night. Warren Hu, Warren Hu's photos take readers to places most newspaper readers never venture. In this case, specifically, the San Francisco's goth club scene. A Dog's Life, Pampered Pooches. Mike Stocker searched out for the best examples he could find for this amusing photo package about over-the-top treatment of dogs. His project is a good example of quote unquote hitting the highlights of a topic, right? He plowed the yellow pages, sought out newspaper assignments, called out on old contracts, and pounced on pure chance to find dogs living the good life. While the individual pictures are fun, the package shows the extremes people go to in order to pamper their four-legged friends. And some of you guys might be sympathetic to this because I know there's a lot of pet fans out there. Stocker has created an essay that carries its own punch without the need of a great deal of text. You can review these photos and get the narrative. Photojournalist Ilvi, and I have to insert here, I'm not going to even try to pronounce her last name. I've actually looked up how to say it, and it is a tongue twister. I will say that she's from the Netherlands, and you should do some research on her and look up her work. It's amazing photo journalism. But I digress. She was covering the funeral of an extreme right politician in South Africa when she met Khalaf Jules, seen in the center of the photo on the far left, ironically. Jules is the founder of the extreme right-wing group, the Commando Corps. The photojournalist learned that Jules organized camps for teenage Africans, or as they call themselves, Afrikaners. Afrikaners are a white South African group of people descending from primarily Dutch settlers who arrived in the 17th and 18th century. Jules teaches these young men that black South Africans are their enemy, and that they're inferior. The young people attending the camps are Afrikaners, as I said earlier, and he tells them that they should deny their South African identity. At the white supremacist camp, young Afrikaners, quote unquote, are being trained to, quote, protect their own people, and they're taught that blacks are, quote, the most underdeveloped species on earth, close quote. So talk about a very interesting photo story, and one could even argue a very important one to showcase that these type of people exist in the world, and not just as we would typically see it in the States. Racism exists in different facets around the globe, and so this is just but one part of that story. So I thought it might be important to take a few minutes to listen to Ivory's story, or at least her story, in terms of how powerful storytelling can be through photography and multimedia.
Would ever lose its power, because single images to me, but I'm very biased of course, but to me are so strong. In the past years I've worked a lot on multimedia compilation stories, so audio and video and photography being mixed into one piece. I worked on, I think the most well-known project that I did was Afrikaner Blood, which I worked on together with Alice van Gelder. And I think what makes it strong to combine these different elements is that they all make each other stronger. I think when you hear audio and at the same time look at pictures, somehow the picture gets better. It gets more in depth. You get more knowledge. You hear the person who you actually are seeing in the picture. You hear them talk. But in the same way, it's also different than video to me, because video, the image keeps moving, and still photography sometimes gives you the chance to really zoom in and look at certain aspects of a picture. But I also think it doesn't work for every story. I think some stories are just better in print, or some pictures are better in, or some stories are better in a scrolly telling kind of setting where you have an online interactive and scroll through it. So I think every narrative has its own way, or should have its own way of telling. In the past year, I started working with virtual reality, and I thought when I first started, oh, this is so great, and it's like you're really there, and you're looking through these glasses. But then I realized, oh well, this also doesn't work for every single story. It works very well on specific stories, and then on others it's useless to use the VR, I think. You know why we're making stories, or at least why I'm making stories, is because I want to tell as many as people as possible about a certain subject. There's not really any new, I mean, we have drones, there's VR, there's interactive storytelling. I don't know what else we could get in the near future that would make it a whole lot better. I do know that some colleagues are now actually going back to printing their portfolio in newspaper and giving it to editors instead of showing all these high-tech things, because they kind of go back to basic. What I now do before I start a long-term project or before I start working on an assignment, I always think, so what matches best with this story? Would it be good in VR? Would it be good to have audio? Why would I record video for this, and why not? And I think to actually think about what works best also helps to tell the story in the end.
Finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't include examples of work from one of my favorite photography heroes, and again, you know who I'm going to be bringing up, Steve McCurry. In his online gallery on his website, which is centered around Buddhism, Steve includes a passage from Perry Garfinkel from his book Buddha Rising. Around the globe, today there is a new Buddhism. Its philosophies are being applied to mental and physical health therapies and to political and environmental reforms. Athletes use it to sharpen their game. It helps corporate executives handle stress better. Police arm themselves with it to diffuse volatile situations. Chronic pain sufferers apply it to a coping salve. This contemporary relevance is triggering a renaissance of Buddhism, even in countries like India, where it has nearly vanished, and in China, where it has been suppressed. I think that not many people put together a photo narrative as well as Steve McCurry, and shoots with such visual variety and from different angles and facets to collectively tell a narrative. And in short, his photos are just gorgeous to look at in general, but photos can't just be aesthetically pleasing, they need to tell a story. And I think, again, Steve McCurry is one of the better practitioners in that area. And as always, we're going to have an assignment here. This particular assignment will be your final, and it will be a photo story. So taking all the stuff that we just talked about and putting it into practice. The goal for this assignment is to identify a photo story and prepare it so that you can propose it to me by Friday, May 8th at noon. Your photo story ideas can come from a personal experience, assignments, news stories, or any other source. It can be a narrative or a short documentary. You can focus on issues, major issues in society, a journey that you've taken or someone else has taken, an interesting person, a complication, a competition, a significant moment, or anything you want, as long as you can identify a particular narrative or story or central theme. With these photos, you want to stick to journalistic guidelines. Therefore, there should not be any setup of the photos, quote unquote, or major digital manipulation, or so adding anything digitally or taking away anything digitally from the photo. You can have digital manipulation, but very simple digital manipulation, such as cropping, along with maybe a little light editing, um, and color editing to a certain extent. And when I say color editing, I mean, white balancing your photo so that the light looks more natural if you see fit. You're allowed to ask the subjects you encounter, if there's any subjects in your photos, for an environmental portrait um, that keeps a sense of the space that the individual occupies. So again, that's the only posing, quote unquote, that you can do. Again, if you have a subject, let's just say you're covering, for instance, uh, a specific eatery in town. Maybe it's a coffee shop, right? And so if you come upon someone in the coffee shop um, that is having a cup of coffee, then you can say, okay, well, I want to get a photo of kind of the to and fro, the hustle and bustle of this particular coffee shop, and I'd like for you, since you're already here, to be in that um, within the frame. And so you can ask them to just continue doing what they're doing as you document what's going on. That's acceptable. For the most part, you want these images to be somewhat candid, not majorly posed in any way. So just to kind of give a bullet point presentation of what we're talking about here and somewhat of a review, let's look at some bullets here. So again, you need to identify a photo story or figure out what your photo story is going to be, or the theme of your photo story, and propose it to me by Friday, May 8th at 12 p.m. You need to see submission format in Moodle instructions. So how are you going to give this to me? It's in the instructions that you can find in Moodle. Again, I say go to Moodle, make sure that you read the instructions. All the submission details will be there. Your photo story must be approved by me before you begin shooting. So again, it's imperative that you get your pitch to me by the deadline so that I can give you the approval to go ahead and start. As most of our assignments go, you need to shoot at least 30 photos that tell or support the narrative that you're going for. You can obviously do more than that. You're not certainly limited to 30, but you should be shooting quite a bit to make sure that you're covering all the angles of your story. You will submit at least 30 of the photos to your Google Drive folder, but choose 10 as your strongest in terms of telling/supporting the narrative, and file those in your Drive folder according to the assignment instructions. Again, go on Moodle, pull up the instructions, and read them from top to bottom so that you're getting all these details here. Each of the 10 selected photos you choose should have a cut line. I repeat, should have a cut line. So you're going to be writing cut lines for all of these photos for the 10 that you select. Review the cut line materials under resources in Moodle. There's some other literature that you should have seen already, but just as a reminder, if you go in Moodle under resources, there will be some literature on writing cut lines, much more detailed than what we had in this slide. Each student will have 3 minutes to present their work via Zoom. We're going to be critiquing all of this work as we typically do, but instead of me doing most of the talking here, you're going to have the opportunity to present your work, talk about why you shot it, why you chose that particular theme, some of the things that you had to deal with, so on and so forth. You're going to be doing that within a 3-minute slot. We'll also have 2 minutes of response time for those others in the class to discuss your work. So everybody should get about 5 minutes of time per student. This is mandatory, so everyone needs to show up and present their work. It's part of the overall grade. If you have any issues with attending the Zoom meeting, please let me know ahead of time so that we can work something out. But for the most part, I want everyone to be in attendance so that they can present their work. Order of presentations is random, so Make sure that you're ready to discuss your work at any point in time. And of course, like all of our assignments here, keep in mind the lighting conditions that you're shooting within, how to control those or adjust for that within camera or in post if need be in the edit process. Uh, think about composition always, 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 always think about composition while you're shooting uh, and the overall aesthetic value of your shots. Keep that in mind. All of the complete deadlines and details are posted in the instructions. It seems like there's a recurring theme here. So read them completely. Go on Moodle, pull up the instructions, read all the instructions completely from top to bottom, including all the things that you're expected to turn in and how to turn them in, and so on and so forth. So that ends the lecture series in COM 285 Photojournalism. Um, au revoir, bon chance with your final projects. Be well, be safe. Remember to continue to wash your hands and practice good hygiene in this day and age. Continue to do so that we can, quote unquote, flatten the curve, as we've talked about. Um, make informed decisions and smart decisions with how you conduct yourself in the world, um, even after this particular crisis is ended. Also, don't forget to indulge in activities that bring you mental balance and wellness. You know, it's not all about schoolwork and work in general. You have to balance some um, playtime, quote unquote, as well. And as always, if you have any questions about anything I've talked about in the lecture or anything about the final assignment, please make sure that you email me as soon as possible, and we will be able to address that at the time. So again, I wish you well, and be safe, be well, and I will see you in the final presentations.